I'm Susan Yawkey with VOA's Middle East Monitor. Coming up, the world community looks to the future for Afghanistan.
In the ordinary people's view on the street, this is one more show for a corrupt government.
Israel practices a biological attack response. The U.S. asks a key Asia ally to join with additional sanctions against Iran. And U.S. troops return from Iraq and reflect on their lives. It's all ahead on The Voice of America. One decade ago, diplomats gathered in Bonn, Germany, to appoint a transitional government in Afghanistan. Now, with international combat forces set to leave in 2014, more than 100 delegations have come to Bonn for a conference on the future of Afghanistan. VOA's Suzanne Presto reports from Bonn.
The focus of the Bonn conference is to shift away from an Afghanistan in transition toward an Afghanistan transformation. Delegates are discussing three key areas, including the transfer of security responsibilities from international to Afghan forces, political reconciliation, and long-term international engagement, including aid and training. German Foreign Minister Guido Westerwelle reflected on the decades since the initial conference in 2001.
There have been setbacks. Not all of our objectives and expectations have been realistic. And yet, we have achieved a lot. Most Afghans now enjoy more freedom, peace and security than at any time in the past 30 years.
Afghanistan President Hamid Karzai highlighted that Afghan women make up 20% of the civil service sector, more than a quarter of parliament, and nearly 40% of students in schools. Overall, school enrollment rose from less than 1 million in 2002 to more than 8 million now. The Afghan president added that more roads have been built in the past 10 years than in the nation's history. Mr. Karzai said he was grateful to the international community for its support, but he noted the fragility of the advancements.
The challenges that remain are significant and have the potential to derail our progress and reverse our achievements. Poverty and underdevelopment are still our top challenges. Our young democracy remains fragile, and the Afghan people are yet to see their aspirations realized through a strong, effective, and accountable national institutions.
Mr. Karzai said the political process remains open to Taliban and other militants who renounce violence and accept the Afghan constitution. He added that his nation will require continued financial support through the next decade. An Afghan transition strategy paper circulating at the conference said the work of the past 10 years could come undone unless Afghanistan's significant fiscal gap is addressed. U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said the United States will resume contributing to the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund. That funding was suspended earlier this year due to irregularities with the Kabul bank that have since been addressed.
The United States is prepared to stand with the Afghan people for the long haul to support this transition to sustainable stability and growth. And we recognize that the Afghans themselves, as the President has said, have commitments that they must meet, taking difficult decisions to embrace reform, lead in their own defense, and strengthen an inclusive democracy rooted in the rule of law.
Clinton praised the Afghan president's commitment to proceed with inclusive elections in 2014. She also said the United States and international partners must remain committed to training and advising Afghan forces. Afghanistan's neighbor, Pakistan, was notably absent from the conference, declining to come in protest of NATO airstrikes last month that killed 24 Pakistani troops near the Afghan border. Secretary Clinton said the entire region has a stake in Afghanistan's future, and Pakistan's contributions to the conference would have been beneficial. Suzanne Presto, VOA News, Bonn.
Kabul has estimated it will need around $10 billion a year in an international aid for many years to prevent the government and security forces from collapsing. But some say that is unrealistic, considering the global economic crisis that is straining international budgets and concerns about corruption in the Afghan government. VOA's Victor Beattie is following the story, and he spoke with Afghan-born Nazif Shahrani, a professor of Near Eastern languages and cultures at Indiana University. Shahrani is currently in Kabul studying the Afghan government. He tells us the underlying problem facing Afghanistan is not security, but the current government.
From the government's point of view, this is a great achievement. They have brought 80-something countries. They're going to discuss the government's plans and expectations and hopes for the future, especially post-2014. But from the opposition point of view, in the ordinary people's view on the street, this is one more show for a corrupt government, and not much is expected to come out of that, as it has not in the previous conferences. They say there are now 10 conferences in a row, one every year in different places, and none of what has been said or promised has been implemented. The government gets more corrupt, more ineffective, and more inefficient, and poverty is getting worse, and people are more and more disillusioned, so that they are not expecting much to come out of Bonn 2. The opposition group, some of them have, I think, managed to be in Bonn, and they are speaking on the sidelines and complaining about not being included, not being consulted in the agenda of the conference, so that they hope they might be able to air some of their concerns on the sidelines. But the government of Kabul, President Karzai's regime, has not included them and has only taken the people that he wished and wanted, and will pursue the same old stuff as he has done during the previous conferences in the last 10 years.
Talk about the boycott of Pakistan. What impact will that have?
The Pakistan, I think it's good that they didn't go. They created a situation to not to go and to complain and be bitter about things that is the result of their own behavior. They have never been sincere about peace in Afghanistan. They have always wanted either to control the country completely or else continue the terrible situation here in Afghanistan to milk the United States and international community for more and more funds and keep the army in charge. So they're not going, I think, from the point of view of Afghans here on the street, and I think even the government, is that it's not good. Their true face is being exposed, that they are insincere as friend and partner to the coalition, to the United States, and working towards peace. They really do not want peace, and the outcome is that Pakistan is not a good partner, and for them not participating is a good evidence of that, in addition to their keeping bin Laden for 10 years in their country and protecting him, and now protecting the Taliban and the Shura in Quetta.
Once international forces leave the country, who will Afghanistan turn to? Iran?
No, I think both Iran and Pakistan are equally feared in Afghanistan, and the hope is that the international community will not abandon Afghanistan after 2014. The main challenge in Afghanistan for the international community is not so much security and army and police and so forth. It's putting a proper governance system in this country. The real problem, the real challenge is Mr. Karzai's regime, that it has not behaved the way, I think, in 10 years ago, people had hoped in Bonn, that it would be a democratic government and not a kleptocratic government. What we have ended up is a bunch of kleptocrats running this country, and I think this is the main challenge for the international community in the next 3-4 years. Unless they fix the political system in this country and have a proper government that has the support of the people of Afghanistan, it will be very difficult to bring security to this country.
Nazif Shirani, a professor at Indiana University, speaking to us from Kabul. He warns that unless the country's political system, including the Constitution, is altered, Afghanistan risks falling back into the chaos of the 1990s once international forces leave in 2014.
Are you looking for a comprehensive daily look at events reshaping the Middle East? Visit voanews.com/ME. You'll find VOA's original reporting from the region, in-depth analysis from our Washington team, VIP interviews, online polls, photo essays, and mini documentaries. Bookmark us or add us to your RSS reader. That's voanews.com/ME.
The Israeli government has carried out a 2-day exercise it says is aimed at boosting preparedness for any terrorist attack aimed at sparking an outbreak of a highly contagious disease. Israeli officials emphasize the biological weapons drill is routine, but it comes amid rising tensions in the region, particularly from Iran. VOA's Scott Bob filed this television report from Afula, northern Israel.
In this exercise, no one knows what contagious agent has been used, anthrax, botulism, or another deadly organism. The staff must identify the agent and within hours begin vaccinating the local population against it. Israeli Assistant Defense Minister Ze'ev Snir is in charge of the program. He says the drill is held each year in a different part of Israel.
This is a general preparedness that we are trying to work on. I believe that basically our Ministry of Health is in a good level of preparedness, and this kind of drills will make us even better prepared.
The exercise comes amid rising tensions in the region. Western governments last week tightened sanctions against Iran after the United Nations Nuclear Agency, IAEA, said it had evidence that Iran was trying to build a nuclear bomb. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called for even tougher measures.
Iran is developing nuclear weapons. It is important to impose sanctions, tough sanctions, on this regime, even tougher than those that have been imposed over the past few days.
Israel's defense minister said the country does not want to take military action against Iran over its nuclear program, but at some point may have no other option. Iran says it would retaliate if attacked, and so would its allies in neighboring Lebanon and Gaza. Several rockets fired from Lebanon landed 50 kilometers north of here without causing casualties. Shlomo Brom, an analyst with the Institute of National Security Studies, says he believes a military strike against Iran is only a distant possibility.
Certainly there are discussions probably in the Israeli government on the option of Israeli attack against the Iranian nuclear program as a last resort. But I do not think that it is imminent.
In January, security forces will hold another drill, this one responding to a simulated radiological attack, such as from a uranium-laced weapon or dirty bomb. Scott Bob, VOA News, Afula, Northern Israel.
The United States is asking one of its key Asian allies, South Korea, to join it in toughening sanctions against Iran. This comes in response to rising concern about Iran's nuclear program. VOA correspondent Steve Herman reports from Seoul.
As the United States and countries of the European Union discuss restricting Iran's lucrative oil exports, other nations are being approached to curtail business relations with Tehran. The International Atomic Energy Agency of the United Nations last month issued a report outlining more evidence Iran is working to design a nuclear weapon. Tehran says its nuclear activities are only to generate electricity. But since the report, Western nations have taken a series of actions aimed at further isolating Iran. As part of those diplomatic maneuvers, the U.S. State Department's advisor for non-proliferation and arms control, Robert Einhorn, is in the Republic of Korea this week. Einhorn says he understands South Korea, with scant fossil fuel resources, may be reluctant to significantly reduce purchases of Iranian crude oil. But he says South Korea and other allies in a similar situation can switch suppliers of petrochemicals.
I think the ROK government recognizes the importance at this particular juncture of sending a clear, unified message to Iran. We've, I think, gotten a positive reaction. The ROK government is continuing to give consideration to what additional measures it wishes to take.
About 10% of South Korea's total oil imports come from Iran. That accounts for half of the total trade between the two countries. But South Korea is also taking into consideration the close relationship on advanced weapons technology, possibly including nuclear, between Iran and Seoul's rival neighbor, North Korea. The United States maintains more than 28,000 military personnel in South Korea. American troops have been posted here since the Korean War of the early 1950s. The two Koreas technically remain at war as no peace treaty was signed. Another item on Einhorn's agenda this week is discussions on revising a 1974 agreement between Seoul and Washington on nuclear energy. The accord, which expires in 3 years, currently prohibits South Korea from reprocessing spent nuclear fuel that could yield plutonium to make nuclear weapons. Einhorn is among several U.S. government officials visiting Seoul in the next few days for foreign policy discussions. The new special representative for North Korean policy, Glenn Davies, is also to hold talks. He is expected to be joined by the top U.S. nuclear negotiator on North Korea, Clifford Hart. Hart's predecessor, Sung Kim, recently became the U.S. ambassador to South Korea. Also due to arrive in Seoul is the Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary for East Asia, Derek Mitchell. He is also a special envoy for Burma. In wake of Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's historic visit to Burma last week, Mitchell is expected to ask for South Korea's help to pressure Burmese officials to cut any remaining questionable relationships with North Korea. U.S. officials say among the conditions for America's relationship with Burma to improve is the Southeast Asian country coming clean about cooperation with Pyongyang on missile and nuclear development. Steve Herman, VOA News, Seoul.
Egyptians in the country's two largest cities and other areas are going to the polls in a series of runoff elections for parliament, with Islamist parties expected to build on strong results from the first round of voting last week. The runoff elections in Cairo, Alexandria, and 7 other provinces begin today and end Tuesday. They will determine the individual winners of 52 seats in Parliament's 498-member lower house. Only 4 individual candidates won seats in last week's first round by securing more than 50% of the votes in their constituencies. VOA reporter Mohammed El-Shinawi recently returned to Washington from a month-long trip to Egypt. Today, he stopped by the studio to chat about what he found. I asked, with all that is going on in the nation, the Arab Spring, elections, protests, what is the attitude of the Egyptians he spoke with?
Actually, most intellectuals I talk to are so pessimistic about the intentions of the Supreme Military Council of the Armed Forces, or SCAF. They cite several justifications for that negative perspective. 1. SCAF wasted almost 10 months without a clear roadmap to transfer power to an elected civil government. 2. SCAF tried to outsmart the people by inserting items in the so-called Super Constitution guidelines that would have amounted to make the army the source of authority and power and not the people. 3. As they were pressured by Tahrir Square masses, they went ahead with an expedited timetable that would make it possible for a civilian government to take over by June of next year instead of the end of 2013 as previously announced. Finally, when elections started, they surprised everyone by insisting that the elected parliament would only select a commission to draft the new constitution but will not form the new government. So many analysts in Cairo believe the new battle over power would be between SCAF and the new parliament.
But why are the generals clinging to power when they had originally promised to pass it on to civilians in 6 months?
Well, Susan, since the Camp David Accords in 1979 with no potential war with Israel, the military turned its energy to economic enterprises. We have seen army generals ran farms, factories, mining projects, hotels, and commercial projects. It is estimated that they control now up to 25% of the Egyptian economy. So, with the revolution, people are asking questions about military privileges, and that's why the generals are trying to keep their unmatched influence and maintain their economic interests.
Before you left for Egypt, you and I spoke about the humor of the Egyptian people, even during the midst of riots in Tahrir Square. And you promised to bring us back a report about if that good sense of humor continues.
It does. Actually, out of fear that Islamists are bound to take over Egypt, Egyptians started making fun of the future parliament and the competition between liberals and strict militant Salafis. One famous liberal in Egypt is Professor Amr Hamzawi, who won one district by a landslide against an Islamist, while more Islamists are winning the elections. Hamzawi has a long hair, and Salafis are wearing long beards. So a cartoon depicted the new parliament with one representative with long hair and the rest with long beards. So Egyptians are joking that the ideological difference inside the new parliament would be whether to grow hair or grow birds. Other Egyptians are joking that the Beltway in Cairo would soon change its name under Islamists to the straight path, which leads to heaven according to the Islamic belief.
Well, I'm glad to hear they still have their sense of humor. Thanks, Mohammed.
Thank you, Susan.
VOA reporter Mohammed El-Shinawi speaking with us in our Washington studios. You can hear our chat again and much more if you listen later this week to our podcast online at VOA Middle East Voices. Thousands of troops have been returning to bases in the United States as Washington completes its drawdown of forces in Iraq. VOA Pentagon correspondent Luis Ramirez reports from Fort Hood in the U.S. state of Texas, where plane loads of soldiers have been arriving ahead of a December 31st deadline to withdraw from Iraq.
Home for the holidays with a hero's welcome. This was the last of several deployments in Iraq for U.S. Army Major Michael Williams.
It's a sensational experience, and the feeling is, I guess, of euphoria.
Williams is one of tens of thousands leaving Iraq after President Obama's decision to bring home the troops by the end of the year. After 8 years and with more than 4,000 Americans killed, troops are back on home soil. Thousands are returning to Fort Hood alone, turning in their guns and preparing for life at home.
Do these look good?
The smell of freshly baked Christmas cookies and hugs from his children mean for Williams that he is home, and this time he can plan to stay for some time. His wife Royanne has been on her own with the children. She says she is not sure if this was the right time for U.S. forces to leave Iraq, but she savors the moment of her husband's return.
It's wonderful. We haven't been able to stop smiling and get the house decorated for Christmas because we waited for him, and it's been wonderful.
She reflects on the suffering and the sacrifice that her family has had to make in the past 8 years and says that for her, none of it was in vain if it means her children will live in a safer world.
I would rather trying to fight the terrorists and everything on another soil than our own, and if he had to go back as many times as he did for our children, hopefully not to have to go back over there, as long as it was done right this time, it's definitely worth it.
Williams came under fire several times in Iraq.
It's my second one I've received.
He brings back a bronze medal. But he says the biggest reward is knowing that he did his part to make his country safer by ridding Iraq of Saddam Hussein and fighting terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda.
It was a great accomplishment in terms of we've liberated a nation, we've taken care of the enemy on his soil versus having to come to the United States and attacking us again. And I think in the long run, I think it has saved a lot of soldiers and a lot of civilians in our country from having to make the ultimate sacrifice and having another 9/11.
Williams, like thousands of others returning to Fort Hood, is going through a reintegration program and getting ready for his new role as a soldier at base.
Personal plan now is to reintegrate with my family, get reset, refit, go back to my unit, and after the holidays, and start getting our unit going through that whole refit process that you do when you reset all your equipment. You get back into soldiering again.
Williams says the war against terrorism is not finished, and his job now is to get ready for the next engagement, whenever and wherever it may be. For his family, this homecoming marks the advent of a new period of peace at home. Luis Ramirez, VOA News, Fort Hood, Texas.
This has been VOA's Middle East Monitor. Join us Monday through Friday for news from the region and of interest to the region. Coming up on International Edition, the lethal legacy of the Vietnam War continues by abandoned bombs and mines. We'll explain. Thanks for tuning in to the Voice of America.
For more on the stories you've heard on our radio programs, visit our website at voanews.com. That's where you'll find in-depth reports, related stories, videos, and more from our team of correspondents. Or take the news with you by downloading podcasts of your favorite VOA program. That's at voanews.com. Online news for a changing world.